Hola, hola, Connecticut Colt members. This is Yensen Sierra Lambert with video number 3 on how to help your students succeed on the AP Spanish Language and Culture exam. We're down to the wire, just have a couple of weeks to get them ready. So today I'm going to talk about el ensayo argumentativo, the argumentative essay, which is task number 2 in the free response. And I'm going to try to summarize the tips that I give my students throughout the year on how to organize their ideas and how to present their ideas. Of course, this is a summary. So in the end, I'm going to have my email address if you would like the PowerPoint that I'm using today, as well as some other resources, a packet that I give my students step by step, with tips and instructions on how to structure their essay. I'm happy to share that with you, so you can get my email in the end. So let's go ahead and get started with the argumentative essay. So we know that this is an important part of the exam, because it's worth 12.3% of the exam. It used to be a persuasive essay. Now it's just argumentative, and it makes more sense to call it an argumentative essay, because a lot of times our students would argue, but not necessarily persuade. So anyway, let's go ahead and get started. So we know that the students receive 3 authentic sources that they have to analyze. And based on those sources, they have to respond to a question. And these are yes or no questions. And I will show you a few examples in just a second. So they first read an article, and they get about 6 minutes to read the article and to analyze a chart, and that's in print. And the third source is an audio they listen to. Sometimes it's an interview, sometimes it's not, but it's in 2 to 3 minutes long, and they get to hear that audio twice, just twice. And they can take notes as they're listening. So hopefully, wherever they get to listen to this audio, they're not in a loud or crowded gym where they hear echoes. Hopefully, they get a clear audio on that day. Okay, so 2 parts. I like to break down the essay into 2 parts. There's the what and there's the how. So the requirements for this essay, right, is to respond to the question, to include all 3 sources, right, to support their ideas with the sources. They can do that, and they can answer the questions. They can do that and get a 3. However, the way that they get to the 4 or the 5 is the way that they complete the task, through the language that they use, whether it's simple or sophisticated, whether the structures are basic or a little bit more advanced. Also, the way that they organize it through the use of cohesive devices or transitional phrases, such as por lo tanto, según, por eso, all those great phrases that you've given your kids this year. So that's how they get the 5. And I say that because sometimes at the reading, I read an essay that will have an answer to the question. Yes, this should happen. Yes, phones should be allowed in the classroom. And then the student doesn't really develop the ideas in his or her thesis, and simply provides a summary of all 3 sources. By doing that, they're not really integrating their ideas with the sources. It's just a summary of the sources. So for the simple fact that they've answered the questions, they've answered the 1 question, and they've included the sources, but they're just summaries, they can just get a 3. The way they bring it up to a 4 or a 5, again, is by incorporating all that good vocabulary they've learned with you, by taking risks with more advanced language structure, such as the subjunctive or the present perfect, and also by using these transitional cohesive devices that I will highlight in just a minute. So once they take a position, once they decide they're going to argue against or for whatever the question is, they get into writing their thesis. So here's an example of an essay that I've done with my students to practice essay writing. And it's based on the tema curricular de la ciencia y la tecnología. We had a conversation about video games, right? My kids like video games. I'm sure yours do as well. So I had them complete this essay about the possibility of having video games as part of the Olympics. Se deben incluir los esports en los Juegos Olímpicos, right? Many of my students argued in favor, others argued against it. The way that you choose between the two, what I tell my students is sometimes the way that you actually feel about a topic may not be the best way to go, simply because of the sources you've been given. Maybe you understand what you comprehend, what the students comprehend about the sources, would be better suited for an argument that's the opposite of what they actually believe in. And that's okay, because what's being assessed in the argumentative essay is their ability to present ideas and to support those ideas with the evidence they've been given, right? So let's just say this is the question they get on the AP exam. Then they need to decide, am I going to argue in favor or against it? And I say that because when they get the sources, when they start reading the article, when they start analyzing the chart, and when they listen to the audio, they can read and listen with purpose. So on the margins, the spaces that they get in the booklet, they can start taking notes and underlining points in the article or in the chart that would help them with their ideas, and the ideas that they're going to argue. So they can listen with a purpose. They can listen for specific words or phrases that can help them support their ideas. Okay, so they get an article. I highly encourage my students to read the introduction, because sometimes you get an article with a lot of unfamiliar language, a challenging article, and the introduction gives them an idea, and they can infer the meaning of certain words in the article based on what it's been stated in the introduction. Second, with the chart, there's usually percentages, and so you want them to really look at all the numbers and see qué cifras, what figures here they can use to support their arguments. Let's see. And third, the audio, again, it's a good idea to read the introduction, because sometimes the audio can be challenging, especially if there are multiple voices. If it's an interview, maybe it's in an accent from the Spanish-speaking world that they have not practiced in your class, an accent they're not familiar with. So it's a good idea to read the introduction to help them infer the meaning of unfamiliar words in the audio. So once they've read their evidence and they've listened to the audio, they technically have about 40 minutes, only 40 minutes to write this essay. So think of this essay. I always tell my kids, it's a draft. And when I get the essays at the AP reading, and I read these essays as drafts, not the final product. Because really, what can they do in 40 minutes? So one way to organize their ideas, and one way to think of a strong thesis, because the thesis, right, is the key to all of this. If you have a strong thesis, you can write a very good, strong, solid essay. And I encourage my students to use their thesis to help them organize the structure of the essay. So once they decide, should they do this? Should they do that? Going back to the question, the sample question I had, should they include, se deben incluir los esports, which is, if you don't know what esports are, look it up, but it's basically these competitions where people, young people, adults go and compete on very specific video games, but look it up. So once they decide, should they be included or not, they need to come up with the reasons they believe that. Now, these reasons are out of the sources, the authentic sources, the article, the chart, and the audio. These are not ideas that they've either heard on their own, on YouTube, or other things they've heard in your class. These ideas should be based on the sources they've read, they've heard, because they need to be able to support them, right? So, se debe, por ejemplo, se deben incluir los esports en los Juegos Olímpicos porque razón A, razón B, y razón C. So what they've done here, and I usually print, if you want to do a practice like this last minute with your kids, it's a great idea. Even if they don't write the essay, I've done this many times. I just give them the sources and I only have them come up with the thesis, and that's it, because this requires practice. So I give them this, a printout of this organizer, and I just have them come up with reason A, B, and C based on the sources. So once they've done this, if you think of it, they already have razón A will be paragraph 2 of the essay, right? Because the thesis and the hook are in the intro paragraph, but razón A is paragraph number 2. Razón B is paragraph number 3. Razón C is paragraph number 4. Did I count those right? Yes, I did. So in a way, they've already, they already have an idea of what to write next. And it's super important that they know that, again, because they only have 40 minutes to complete this. They don't have time, right, to think about, oh, how do I proceed? What do I write next? No, it's all in the thesis. They know exactly what they need to write. So think of this as their GPS, right, for the essay. So it would look something like this. Again, going back to that same question about esports. So, se deben incluir blah, 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 porque es una actividad que atrae a muchos jóvenes. I got that from the article that I use for this particular essay. And if you would like this particular essay that I put together, let me know, email me, and I'll send it to you and you can use it for your students. And then number 2, es un evento que une a las naciones. I got that from the article as well. Y porque promueven el compañerismo y la disciplina. I got that from the audio. That's part of this essay. So they don't necessarily need to be from all 3 sources, but they need to be from the sources. And then you want to use the sources later on to support these ideas. So these are 3 ideas that I think I can argue based on the information that I read in the article, the statistics that I saw, the percentages that I saw on the chart, and also what I heard, what I comprehended from the audio, okay? So again, they need to take a stand, right? Take a position on this, una postura, and then come up with reasons. And my students will ask me all the time, do I need to have 3 reasons? You don't. I've read essays with just 2 really good ideas. It's better to have 3 simply because when you run out of things to say for A and B, it's good to have a 3rd idea to argue so that you have a more complete essay. However, I have read from my own students and other students at the AP reading really good argumentative essays that have gotten a 4 or a 5 with just 2 really good ideas, okay? Let's see. So again, I'm just summarizing. I'm not going to go over every single little thing that I have in this PowerPoint. El gancho, some ideas for the hook, right? It needs to be attractive. It needs to get the reader's attention. So here's a few things that my students have used on the for their hooks and their argumentative essays. Now, the only thing I'm going to point out from this slide right here is that if you choose to go with the statistic, it is important that this statistic is not just a number that the students come up with right then and there. It needs to be una cifra, a figure that came from either the chart, the article, or maybe they heard it in the audio. But it needs to come from there, because otherwise anyone can make up a percentage. I mean, I can just randomly say 80% of Facebook users are under the age of 70, right? Where is that? How can I prove that? And this is also a good way to include one of the sources. Sometimes students, depending on the essay that they get, sometimes they struggle finding a place of where to include the chart. And sometimes this is the place to include it, right? So maybe this 20% came from the chart. So you cover that source. All right, so el puente is just a way to connect the hook and the thesis. And you can get ideas from here or from the packet that I'm going to email you when you email me requesting it. Here's an example of an introductory paragraph that includes a hook, el puente, a bridge, as well as the thesis that we already read. And I color-coded them for my students now. This is a highly sophisticated introductory paragraph, but it's just to give them an idea on how to structure it, which sometimes I feel like that's the biggest challenge for them initially. So durante la última década, la audiencia de los Juegos Olímpicos ha disminuido en gran medida. That's a shocking statement that would really get my attention as a reader. I want to read more. Why are the Olympics, losing viewers on TV? Like I grew up watching the Olympics. Why are they not so popular right now? So that's attractive. So again, here's this is just the, that was the same thesis. Okay, so here, last thing I'm going to share with you today. This is what a paragraph, a developed paragraph, would look like using that organizer. So remember idea number 1 from that organizer, es una actividad que atrae a muchos jóvenes. So I'm going to develop that idea in paragraph number 2. Now, here's your topic statement. Las competencias de esports atraen a muchos jóvenes. It's not exactly verbatim what I wrote in the thesis, because of course in the thesis it has to be more compact, a summary of that idea that I want to develop. But here, I develop it a little more. It's longer. I explain it a little more. But this is my topic statement, and I start developing it by bringing in the sources. Según el artículo, right? So I'm already beginning to integrate my idea with the sources. And notice that my quote is not super long. So encourage your students to stay away from including super long quotes. 1, they take forever to write down. And 2, the readers just really want to hear from them, right? They want to hear what they have to say about the article. The readers at the AP Reading have already read the article. They don't need a paragraph long quote. So here, la participación de equipos de esports mundiales en eventos olímpicos, I'm integrating my ideas with the sources. And if you look back at the AP rubric for the essay, one of the bullet points for the 4 and the 5 is that the student is integrating as opposed to summarizing. I'm not summarizing the sources. I'm just using them to support my ideas. And furthermore, if they have the opportunity to include 2 sources in the paragraph, to integrate 2 sources, that is impressive. And it makes the readers go, wow, there's a lot of integration in this paragraph. So because of what I'm arguing here, this idea for paragraph number 2, it taps into what's mentioned in the article and what I heard in the audio. I'm going to take this opportunity to include both sources, and that makes your argument even stronger. And as you can see, I'm using very specific language to introduce the sources según el artículo, cómo se menciona en la fuente auditiva. I know that some students, as well as teachers, prefer to write F1 or F2 or F3 in parentheses to indicate the sources. You can do that as well. Or, I would prefer, and that's just my personal preference for my students, I feel like it's a little bit more sophisticated to do it this way. However, the F1 in parentheses is also acceptable. In this PowerPoint as well, I go over avoiding simple language in basic language that a Spanish 1 or Spanish 2 student would use, because if you look at the rubric, one of the bullet points for the language under 3 and the 2 is that the language is basic, right? So we don't want simple words like grande. We don't want simple words like dice, and also dice repeatedly. There's so many different ways of saying dice. El artículo menciona, el artículo resalta, la fuente auditiva recalca, apoya. There's so many different ways to introduce those ideas that is not dice, 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 dice over and over. And also with no le gusta, how about saying no está de acuerdo con? That's a little bit more sophisticated than no le gusta. So again, in this PowerPoint and packet, I go over that, and also sophisticated language. Whenever they get the opportunity to include el presente perfecto, that goes a long way. Also, the subjunctive, it is an essay about the student's opinion. Why not use the subjunctive with impersonal phrases such as es importante que incluyan, es importante que tengan, es importante que demuestren, and then that elevates the language of the essay, right? And that brings them up from the 3. So another one last one are oraciones con sí, and I don't know if you got to cover that this year with your students. I did, because it's a good way to kind of close your essay in the end, en la conclusión, bring all of your ideas together, summarize them. Si los Juegos Olímpicos incluyeran a los esports, ampliarían su audiencia, right? So you want to do that. You don't have to do oraciones con sí. It's just a preference that I have for my students. I have them well trained to use them in the conclusion. So if you get a few days to go over them before the exam, definitely do, because if they get them right, if they can get this grammar right, the imperfect of the subjunctive as well as the conditional, it goes a long way and it really impresses the readers. See? Okay, so I'm going to wrap it up here. And let me post. I did promise sharing my email with you. Here's my email. Again, let me know if you'd like a few of my resources. I'm happy to share them. And I will be back next week with another video on la conversación, the conversation. I have last minute tips for my students that have yielded amazing results. My students score very high every year because of these tips. So I will share them with you next time. So hopefully you got something out of this video today for the argumentative essay. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next week. Buenas noches.